After witnessing a shooting, Beth Walker rushes upstairs to escape the armed intruder. She locks herself in the bathroom but can't flee through the window. With the assailant at the door, she empties bleach into a bucket and splashes it on him when he enters. Earlier, Beth casually leafed through a vacation brochure during her work break. Her colleague Allie remarked on the brochure, wondering if Beth's husband had given it to her as a gift for their wedding anniversary. Beth denied it, mentioning that things were different between her and her husband. Allie suggested that it might be time for them to have children to love as a couple. Beth confessed that she hadn't been intimate with her husband since he returned from military service. This made Allie worry if her husband was cheating on her, but Beth firmly denied it. Switching gears, Allie shared her nervousness about her upcoming appointment as she and her husband were expecting a baby. Just then, the cook called Beth back to work, prompting Allie to leave. On her way out, she suggested Beth cook something special for her husband for their anniversary. Beth returned to work and approached two customers, Doug and JB. The men leered at her, and Doug pulled her onto his lap. Beth endured the situation until a police officer, Walt Armentrout, intervened. Now, with backup, Beth stood up and the officer warned the thugs, threatening to check their backgrounds if they didn't leave. Defiantly, Doug retorted at the officer before departing with his friend. When Beth returned to the counter, she asked Walt not to inform her husband about the incident, fearing it might frighten him and lead her to quit. Walt nodded and advised her to give her husband another chance and start anew. Meanwhile, Beth's husband, Officer Pete, was on duty, monitoring the road. He observed vultures gathering around a dead deer when Walt radioed him over. He mentioned having coffee at Beth's diner, and when Pete asked if anything happened, Walt reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. Walt read the letter, mentioning their anniversary, and assured Pete that his wife seemed happy, so their relationship should be smooth sailing. While they spoke, Pete noticed Doug and JB driving by. Later, as Beth started her car to head home, Doug's truck stopped to block her path before driving away. Despite feeling anxious, Beth continued on her way. Arriving home, she prepared to cook, but there was no water from the sink. She stepped outside for a smoke before checking the dry well in the yard. That night, Pete arrived with a gift, which he quickly hid. Seeing his wife dressed up and cooking, he praised her before heading upstairs to change. Before he left, Beth reminded him to lock his gun in the safe. Pete hesitated, but followed her advice. He tried to kiss Beth, but only managed to peck her cheek, leaving her disappointed. Elsewhere, Doug and JB relaxed in their truck, passing the time. They discussed stars and luck, but JB felt pessimistic about Doug's planned job. Soon, Walt's police car pulled up behind them. The officer approached them and questioned their presence on the road leading to the Walker's house. Without hesitation, Walt aimed his gun and ordered them out of the vehicle. He searched JB and discovered a gun, which he discarded. This angered JB, but Walt aimed his gun at him before he could retaliate. He did the same with Doug, tossing away his firearm. Then, Walt struck their legs with his club and warned them to leave. Injured, the two stumbled back to their truck and drove off. However, as Walt turned his back, the truck spun around and struck him. Meanwhile, at the Walker household, Pete had prepared a romantic dinner for his wife. But before they sat down, Pete turned on the police scanner. Beth requested him to switch it off, and after a brief hesitation, Pete complied. He turned off the radio and hid the safe key inside an ornament, demonstrating his commitment to their evening together. Delighted, Beth played some music and invited him to dance. As they embraced, Pete confessed his desire to restore their relationship, but admitted to struggling to initiate the process. In response, Beth coyly gazed at him as she grabbed the wine bottle and headed upstairs. Later, Pete and Beth were depicted enjoying each other's company, although Beth appeared distracted as she glanced at the clock. Pete woke up to a bright morning sun and realized Beth was nowhere to be found. He searched for her, and when he spotted her outside by the fire pit, she vanished suddenly. The man snapped out of his daydream and rose to his feet. He checked the photo of his wife in his wallet while Beth, also awake, came to check on him. The man stood and remarked on the quietness of their home. Just then, he noticed a truck pulling up and asked Beth if she was expecting anyone. Pete went downstairs to check on the truck, while Beth peered out the door. As the thugs descended from the truck, Pete conversed with them briefly before returning to Beth. He informed her that there had been an accident down the road involving a police officer, and the two men had come to seek help. Pete instructed Beth to call for assistance, lock the door, and secure his gun. Meanwhile, He intended to accompany the men to investigate the accident. With that, Beth went to the phone while Pete drove away with Doug, leaving JB behind. During the journey, Doug initiated a seemingly casual conversation discussing Pete's marriage. He expressed his dedication to his own partner, a sentiment with which Pete agreed. They soon arrived where Walt was, but while the officer attended to his colleague, Doug aimed his gun at him. However, he hesitated when Pete exclaimed that Walt was still alive, prompting Doug to assist in getting the officer into the truck. As they lifted Walt, Doug suddenly realized that his gun was missing. Back in the house, Beth remained motionless as JB offered an apology for the incident at the diner. He requested a drink, so Beth acquiesced and passed him a soda through the door. The thug accepted it and remarked on the house's security as he departed. Just then, he complained about the mosquitoes outside. Feeling sorry for him, Beth decided to invite him indoors. JB glanced around their home and noticed Pete's military awards, just before they heard the truck pull up. The three men carried Walt into the house. Once inside, Pete asked the men to give them some privacy. Alone with Beth, he explained that the men likely ran over Walt and might pose a threat to them as well. He requested his gun, but Beth hadn't retrieved it earlier, so he instructed her to keep the two men occupied while he fetched the gun and called for help. Unaware of their intentions, the unwanted guests debated why Pete was still alive and how Doug had somehow lost his gun. And eventually, the couple approached them and assured them that help was on the way. Beth casually suggested they leave, but Doug insisted on staying until the EMTs arrived. Consequently, Beth offered them some leftovers, and JB readily accepted. However, Doug insisted on washing up in the bathroom first due to the blood on his hands. While cleaning up, Doug overheard Walt coughing. Realizing Walt was alone, he descended the stairs and attempted to smother him with a pillow. Walt glared with dread and struggled to lift his gun, the same weapon Doug had lost earlier. Fortunately, Pete summoned the thug to dine upstairs. Gathered around the table, Beth served the food, placing a knife on each plate. Doug reached for a knife, but Pete intervened, insisting on serving the meal. As they ate, Pete asked some questions, but Doug suddenly attacked. He seized a knife, but Pete swiftly tackled him. JB intervened from behind, but Pete managed to fend him off. Doug then grabbed Pete in a chokehold, and together they subdued him until he lost consciousness. Throughout, Beth remained frozen in fear. When they claimed Pete was dead, she seized the knife and fled upstairs with Doug in pursuit. In her bedroom, Beth confronted Doug, holding the knife to his throat. However, Doug relented and lay on the bed, prompting Beth to drop the knife and transform the harrowing evening into one of passion. Meanwhile, JB observed Walt and noticed the gun at his side. He seized the weapon and informed the officer that the occupants of the house were deceased. JB suffocated Walt with a pillow. After their intimate encounter, Doug spotted a lottery ticket on the side table and questioned Beth about it. Considering her husband's substantial life insurance policy, she clarified that it served as a contingency plan in case things went awry. Doug then revealed a tattoo on his back bearing both their names. This angered Beth, cautioning that she could face trouble if he were apprehended. She mentioned JB as a loose end, but Doug acknowledged his need for assistance, promising to rectify the situation. Beth scoffed at the notion of fixing things, likening him to Pete, who always made similar promises. She said fixing things needed clear sight. Remembering a coyote eating a rabbit, she explained survival instinct. Promising to think like the coyote, she pledged to change. Walt's death altered plans. Beth suggested hiding his body in the well and acting alone to avoid suspicion. Doug hit her to make her look like a victim. Meanwhile, Allie arrived, and JB pretended to be Pete's cousin. Suspicious, Allie tried to leave, but JB asked her to leave the envelope. Finding Pete's body, JB aimed at Allie, but Beth stopped him. Pretending, Beth introduced JB as Pete's army friend. The woman hinted at letting Allie leave, and despite the man's reluctance, he agreed. Beth bid her friend farewell, reassuring her. Meanwhile, Doug descended the stairs, and JB told him Pete had gone. Concerned, JB suggested cutting losses, but Doug insisted on sticking to the plan. JB proposed eliminating Pete and Beth, but Doug pushed him away, angry. Their argument stopped when lights outside showed Pete's presence. Beth returned and confronted JB for endangering her friend, but a loud alarm interrupted. Rushing to turn it off, Beth struggled with the pin. If it lasted 30 seconds, it would alert the police. Doug helped her focus, and she deactivated it. As they celebrated, Beth found the safe empty. Worried, She turned on the police scanner and heard Pete's call for backup. Suspecting Pete was in her car, they went outside to check, but it was empty. Despite this, JB cut the radio while Doug raised his hands, trying to negotiate with Pete. He told Pete they had his wife and proposed negotiation. Unaware of his wife's betrayal, Pete got worried. When JB returned, Pete shot him in the ear. Doug rushed back inside, promising to get help. Enraged and wounded, Pete fired randomly, hitting the outdoor lights. Doug asked Beth for a gun, and she guided him to a locked closet under the stairs. Doug forced the closet open, tossing out Pete's gift and some letters. Beth found a burnt picture of herself and Doug, realizing Pete knew about their relationship. This revelation shattered their plan. Beth suggested they leave, speculating Pete might have removed her from his insurance and pension. Furious, she plotted to regain Pete's trust before taking revenge. Pete tended to his wound and JB tried to shoot him, but Pete tackled him. Beth found JB's body outside. Pete grabbed her and she falsely claimed Doug assaulted her, but she fought back. Inside, Beth claimed everyone was dead, confusing Pete about the absence of help despite her earlier call. Suspicious, he demanded to know how she killed Doug. She pleaded with Pete to lower his gun, but he insisted he saw clearly now. Suddenly, Doug attacked Pete, but Beth's signal alerted him, and he shot Doug. Pete found a photo booth picture in Doug's wallet, prompting Beth to flee upstairs. Locking herself in the bathroom, Beth searched desperately. Meanwhile, Pete remembered finding the photo, leading to the truth. Breaking down the door, Pete was blinded by bleach from Beth. She escaped, grabbed the gun, and ran downstairs. Pete washed off the bleach and chased her. Beth activated the alarm and tried to flee in Doug's truck, but decided not to run anymore. She tried to hit Pete with the truck, but crashed into the well instead. Unharmed, she confronted Pete, asking why he never addressed her secret relationship. She regretted marrying him for a fresh start, only to be confined when he returned from the military. Pete insists that he can still mend their relationship, but she rejects his words, expressing a desire for something beyond him and their current life. As Pete reaches for the gun, she steps back and inadvertently stumbles into the well. Pete manages to grasp her arm, but Beth realizes that despite her efforts to forge a new path, she is left with nothing. With a surge of desperation, she retrieves her hidden blade and stabs Pete's arm, forcing him to release her. Beth plummets into the well, shattered by the turn of events. Devastated, Pete sits on the deck, awaiting assistance. Unbeknownst to him, his estranged wife awakens at the bottom of the well, now granted the fresh start she had longed for.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.